Now, some centres will have maybe their own view on reasonable adjustments. It may be that you function with other awarding body or licensed by other awarding bodies that have other requirements. That may be the case, but OCNI have particular requirements we need you to adhere to. So that's what if you hear I'm coming, that's one of the things I'm going to come to see you about. Okay, so that's the purpose of reasonable adjustments, an overview of the purpose. We're going to now consider the principles underlying reasonable adjustments. I've got 4 cross-cutting principles here for us to consider. Our reasonable adjustment should not invalidate the assessment requirements of the qualification. Each qualification, or if it's an endorsed course, will have requirements, particular assessment requirements. We do not change those. These are your assessment criteria, your learning outcomes. These remain the same. Reasonable adjustments do not adjust those. So if, for example, your assessment criteria asks you to ask the learner to describe something, describe 3 points, they don't list them. That's a reasonable adjustment. We don't change the verb usage in our assessment criteria. That would invalidate the assessment. The learner should not, as I mentioned, should not have an unfair advantage over other learners. The reasonable adjustment should reflect the learner's normal way of working. So it should be something which the learner is used to, is accustomed to already. If a learner comes to you with a particular issue, it's quite possible that they have had to deal with this issue in other ways previously. And so we can expect them to maybe have suggestions as to how they might see accommodation for them. You should be working with the learner. And the adjustment should be based on the individual need of the learner. Okay, so assessment requirements, the competence. Any adjustment to assessment must not invalidate assessment requirements of the qualification or the requirements of the assessment strategy. Competence standards should not be altered. As we mentioned, assessment criteria cannot be changed. We can't emphasise that enough. Adjustment to assessment should not compensate a learner for lack of knowledge and skills. We're not there to give the learner a Bible, so a Bible in terms of assessment criteria. We mentioned that. So knowledge and skills required must always remain the same. They must be able to cope with the content of the assessment and be able to work at the level required for the assessment. Health and safety factors must be considered in the application of adjustments. There are things you may not be able to do. The medical fitness of the learner may be an issue we need to consider. Is the learner fit to undertake, if it's a practical task they're supposed to be doing? Are they able to do it? Will the adjustment undermine criteria? Are they if they can't do it, is it a medical fitness issue? We've mentioned the level. Will a suitable level be more appropriate for the learner? Is your strategy for assessment appropriate? Now, if you were to find that all your learners require the same adjustment, it could be that your issue is more the strategy of assessment and the method you're using in assessment, rather than needing a reasonable adjustment. It may be you need to go back to the drawing board and think, right, maybe we need to look at this again. Everyone needs an adjustment here. Maybe we should adjust the whole process we're applying in terms of assessment method. And then another constraint, the final constraint we've listed here, is the reasonableness of adjustment. What is reasonable? Reasonable being the key word. We will consider later on what the legal definition or legal view of what's reasonable is in terms of adjustment. There may be things that may seem to one extent reasonable, but certain constraints mean they're not reasonable in a certain situation. And we'll look at what do we need to do here? What is appropriate to do? Okay, so any adjustment to assessment must not give the learner an unfair advantage or disadvantage over other learners. There must be a credibility. We need to have maintain credibility in assessment. Our adjustments must be corroborated, must be corroboration. We mentioned justification, must be evidence that the adjustment is sufficient, valid and reliable, and we must have authorization for an adjustment. So if you're an assessor, you will be the person maybe applying the adjustment, but you must have authorization to do that. There must be an authority within the centre, whether external verifier or quality assurance contact, who is in the loop, who gives you the go-ahead. So you're not just applying what you see fit without some sort of authority. Consistency in approach. You mentioned there the normal way of working for a learner. If a learner is used to having a signer, is used to having a prompter, is used to having someone reading for them, then we should seek to stick to that. What there is experience of and what there is practice in. It may be, as a centre, you have used certain adjustments a lot, you're used to using them. Don't just force them on a learner. We need to work with the learner. We need to see what's the most appropriate for that learner. The assessment needs of individual learners should therefore be assessed, obviously in line with the assessment requirements of the qualification. And the support given should be as much a part of normal teaching practice as possible. There are certain instances where you may have to separate your learners away or learner away from the rest of the class. We want you to avoid that as much as possible, but there will be instances where, for the sake of the other learners, we need to be considerate to them as well, and maybe use a separate room or time perhaps to support that learner. Okay, in caution, centres should not assume the same adjustment will be required for all assessment, or that the same learner will need the same assessment or same adjustment for every assessment. Different qualifications and different methods of assessment make different demands on learners. So there may be, if you had a learner with dyslexia, for example, written assessment could present far greater difficulty than some sort of practical demonstration. So we need to be specific to what's required and make sure we tailor our adjustments carefully. Again, consulting with learners is a key. Make sure that they're fully consulted in the process and that we are compliant. Centres must comply with either CENDO or the Disability Discrimination Act in making reasonable adjustments. I'm going to take you through a bit of detail on that later on if you've never considered these things before. But failure to do so could result in your liability for a claim for unlawful discrimination. And we of course don't want that to happen. And so one reason reasonable adjustments are very important, because they'll keep you right of the law. And that's very important, obviously very, very important. I couldn't exaggerate how important that is, very important. So we need to be compliant. This enables compliance.